Thanks for joining me for another episode of our Project Catalyst podcast series. My name's Kim Clyden. All over the world, there are pieces of the Great Barrier Reef living in glass tanks of varying sizes. Owner of Ultra Coral Australia, Nick Dos Santos, collects coral and fish from coastal areas of Mackay, distributing them to the global aquarium industry for more than 30 years. An estimated 20 to 30 million people in the Northern Hemisphere collect coral for aquariums. Could they be the custodians for the future genetic diversity of our reefs? Nick believes they are. So we sat down to explore where his passion for his mysterious watery world began.
We had a family friend on Bribey Island who was a fish collector, and as a kid, the inquisitive kid I was, I seen this neighbour of ours that had this garage glowing and, sound of water and everything, and I was the curious kid. I jumped the fence and said g'day and can I have a look at your tanks? And as soon as I found out about the underwater world, that was it. That was it. I was over. I was like, I'm captured, and I haven't looked back since.
What does it take to go from that curiosity to the next level and being a licensed collector?
Well, that's a huge task, because to look after coral, there's life support systems, to know a global industry, there's a lot to that. There's a lot to know about marine logistics and getting into the ocean to actually know where these corals live, where they are. It's experience is the main thing. There is no course, there is no book, there is no, idiot's guide to. There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. So it's the pioneers and the entrepreneurs like myself that have formed these businesses, and for me, I'm grateful. It's been a learning curve, and we know things about coral that most people don't know.
When I met you back in, I think it was around 2012, and you were telling me about where you actually collected corals, I was amazed, because I wasn't even aware that we had corals that close to shore. So when did you come to Mackay, and how did you get to know the lay of the land and where these corals live?
When I was having a break from diving and I was doing some retail work, I met my wife, and she was from Mackay. And we had kids, and we decided to bring our kids up in a quieter town. Well, that's what we thought when we moved up here. And then I got a second job when I was exploring other avenues and boiler making and electrical and a few other bits and pieces, and just nothing ever fitted. And when I come back here, I had an opportunity to get a second job at a pet store doing the marine side, and I got back into doing saltwater aquariums and all sorts of stuff again, and started up my own business there and dedicated myself back to the ocean and back to the reef. And that was really when I realised in my life that I was like, I'd truly, I'd been away long enough from it for 4 or 5 years that I'd come back and decided that, this is where my heart lies. So that was a big journey to really, move up here. And then I've spent the last, my daughter's about to turn 18, so just over 18 years diving on the Great Barrier Reef here intensively, inshore. For us, it's about everywhere on the Great Barrier Reef. We don't just not go, obviously to legal zones, but coverage of the Great Barrier Reef from the foreshore, the boat ramp, and all the way out to the other side of the reef. We cover the reef in every aspect. We dive in places that no one wants to dive, like out the front of creeks where there's crocodiles and stuff, where we go and collect coral, but most people don't even know it exists. So it's an intriguing lifestyle that never ends in interest, in amazing things, and you've got to remember that it's a place that not many people on the planet get to go to.
So what kinds of corals live in inshore environments? Because those waters are often a bit murky.
Yeah, well, it's really cool. And it's a great thing to spend so much time with them, and you get to learn how they've adapted in their different environments. So when you learn about the Queensland coast and the Great Barrier Reef, a lot of things have happened in 150 years. These corals have actually gone through a lot, and they've had to learn how to survive in water that's a little bit dirtier than most areas, but it's amazing to see that the LPS corals, or the hard stony corals that grow in this area, actually thrive. And there is an amazing array of corals at our doorstep. Literally from the lowest tide of the year, from there onwards, there is just an amazing array of corals. Soft corals, hard corals, aquapora. Yeah, we have little pools around here that have amazing aquapora, staghorn corals growing, where they come out of the water every single tide, every single day, and they survive and flourish. And right at our doorstep here. Literally, you can throw a rock at it from the beach. Acropora in the industry is the most popular coral, but it is the hardest to keep alive, it is the hardest to maintain, and it is the hardest to ship around the world and the hardest but it is the most colourful, the most fastest growing, the most sustainable coral that we could collect because it grows so fast.
So most of us would only see those types of corals when they're washed up dead.
Yes, or if you were to go on a tourism trip anywhere in Queensland. You will go and see those corals at any public reef display or anywhere like that. But what you don't see is, the LPS corals. These corals that you walk out our front door here in Central Queensland and see if you were low tide walking. You don't really see a lot of those corals in public aquariums or any of that.
Why?
Well, because the industry is so busy looking after its own glass boxes of coral that public aquariums don't really get the right skill set to look after those corals. So, some of the projects we're working on will address these things in the future, but some of the problems that I see globally. But yeah, the industry is so fascinated and passionate and well kept within itself that everyone's so busy looking after their beautiful little section of the Great Barrier Reef or their little reef that they've created. You've got to remember that ensuring that every single coral that they purchase, most of the industry is in the Northern Hemisphere where it's cold 9 months of the year. So this is one of their favourite hobbies. But because they don't have coral, they have to import it. So it's very expensive. So the coral it seems to be cherished a lot more and appreciated a lot more. And so in every part of the world, people are enjoying glass boxes with corals in them. And it's a skill set that's it's quite technical. People are chemists, water chemistry, you're talking about plumbing, so water movement, you're talking about pumps, you're talking electricity and water, you're talking lighting, you've got macro and micronutrients, you've got scientific analysis of water that's available to them nowadays. The technology in the industry is phenomenal. I can control my systems here from my phone and can dose certain parameters and maintain certain parameters. I've got cameras, everything here is automatic, so the technology in our industry is phenomenal. And is forever growing and blossoming of the care of these animals in captivity.
Well, it's funny, you're talking about caring for them in captivity with optimal ranges, and yet you're getting a lot of these corals in murky inshore waters at creek mouths.
But when you recreate the environment in captivity, there's some adjustments you've got to make. And what a lot of people don't realise is out the front here, that dirty water that everyone sees, the big tides, the 6 and 7 metre tides that we have here.
Rains.
Yeah, the big rains, that is sediment. A lot of people are getting a lot of these things mixed up. So that's where our future business is going to be doing a lot in the education space, because we see the need we see these gaps and these educational and identification gaps, but a lot of people don't really appreciate that that brown water's nutrients. It's food. It's the basis of life. Microorganisms are going to eat it, and bacteria is going to eat it, and phytoplankton and zooplankton are going to eat it, and the corals are going to eat it. It's an essential food source for the corals here. Why are the corals in the inshore environment so prevalent, and why are they so strong, and why are they doing so well here? Because of the nutrients. It's blowing 35 knots at the moment, and it's stirring the bottom up, and the corals are receiving food. So, and they're receiving a diverse range of nutrients because of the runoff from the land, because of obviously there's some bad stuff in there, but the inshore corals sometimes have some things to deal with. But when has anything on the planet not got anything to deal with?
Everything's a life cycle.
Correct. Yeah. So it's how we manage it and how we deal it. That glass box, that layer of glass or water over the planet. That people just don't enter. They just don't know what's there, and it's the few people that are privileged and grateful that actually get to experience it like I do and share
it changes you, doesn't it, when you go underwater?
It does. Yep.
You've obviously been all over the world, but there's coral reefs all over the world as well. I mean, where do we stand as an exporter of corals to the world?
Well, a very small amount. So what a lot of people in the world don't realise is that there is, yes, a lot of coral reefs around the world. Indonesia, or the Coral Triangle, they call it, the Indo-Pacific, the South Pacific. So where Australia stands in the global market, we have a few species here that are not found in any other country, and as other countries have corals that are not found here, and vice versa. But the Australian industry has been very small over the years. We probably, in my guesstimations, and they are just my guesstimations, we don't have a lot of figures to go often. But we guesstimate that the Australia would have supplied in the peak time probably 10 to 15% of the global consumption of coral. The rest of it was grown in the most sustainable way via mariculture in Indonesia, Tonga, Fiji, PNG, the South Japan Sea in China. The list of countries that have coral reefs that do mariculture or growing of corals using the ocean environment on trays and racks is huge, is phenomenal. And if the public knew of these farms and everything, that would blow their mind. It's amazing. So Australia supplies a very, very small slice, but a quality slice too. We have, you've got to remember, most of these other countries in Indonesia, they're not first world countries. They're not westernized countries fully. So, we do stand supreme, and that's where I've taken my passion from, because I feel really proud when I look at what we do around the world. I'm really proud and grateful to be able to collect corals on the seventh wonder of the world. That on its own is just something remarkable that we're able to even do that. So the limited number of people on the planet that have the ability to do what we do, we should be holding this with a great respect, because it's an essential part of the ecosystem of the ocean, and to be the custodians of looking after coral and glass boxes, we're coming to a time now where there's actually a need for it.
How do you harvest coral, and what's the process that we see here in your tanks?
Well, again, it's a unique trade. So there's no book, there's no university, there's no nothing. So the rules are using hand tools. The hammer and a chisel is generally the option that we use. And you're basically a diver and you're looking around. And for me, it was an experience of learning, because you had to learn that when you have an understanding of the plant world like I do, corals become even cooler, because corals are unique. They're a plant and an animal. So when you start looking at removing corals from their home, you start looking at the substrate that they would grow on. So in some cases in the ocean, it's hard rock or a soft rock or dead coral, which is the basis of all life in the ocean, which is what we call live rock in the industry, which is dead coral that's gone to the bottom, or coral, grows and dies, goes to the bottom and turns into what we call rock or dead coral substrate that's got microorganisms living throughout it now. So now it's become a rock, a substrate for coral to grow on. So, removing coral from the oceans, hammers, chisels, and knowledge of how that coral grew. So when it's like a plant, they all have roots. They all land somewhere, and they start out life as a micro polyp, and then they grow from there. And then some have branching growth forms, some have massive growth forms, some just grow flat like a little plate in coast. And so to collect coral, it's amazing. Every coral grows in a different mannerism. Every coral grows in a different mannerism in a different environment. So you've got to adapt skills and knowledge from just simply doing it, to learn how to remove and learn how certain corals grow. So yeah, it's not an easy thing to do, and it's it's very secret of the industry. Some of the businesses here have unique stuff, so learning from other people. But removing coral from the ocean is not an easy task at all. There's a group of us in Australia that do it, and you don't get into this industry without having that skill set, because it is very expensive to do what we do. Boating, logistics and trucks and insurance and water and electricity in our lives is just, workplace health and safety. So it's not cheap to do what we do. It's not easy to remove coral from the ocean. A lot of people think that we have a dream job, but, sometimes when you've got to run a business, you've got to pay the bills, and if you've got to get into the ocean when the weather's bad, that's not a very pleasant time, and then you've got to find the coral, and you've got to get to know the coral. So it's extremely complex on what happens to make these things happen behind us, like these pictures, these
They're beautiful.
Corals.
And the colours make them highly desirable. How do they get their colour?
Well, it's again we come into a wonderful area, Kim, where there is so much that is not known because of that glass surface on the planet. So the environment has lacked because of the money has not been gone into funding to find out these things. The array of questions that need to be asked about coral and why they are this colour and why they're that colour, they're still trying to figure it out. there's a scientist in the UK that specialises in looking at genetics and how the colour formation forms through genetics. But you know, as I learned as a coral collector, coral researcher, wanting to expand and grow his business into farming and learning how these things happen, so I can learn how to copy them. And in the future, my farming business will be, you know, looking at a different form of looking at coloration of coral, where I would be looking at fine tuning and getting the really good colours of corals that everyone desires, and spawning and growing those guys together and looking at how the coral. But it is a complete mystery. It is
for these ones or all corals.
For all corals. For all corals.
Because there is a substance called, is it zooxanthellae?
Yeah, look, the zooxanthellae that lives inside of this is simply a symbiotic relationship that the algae has with the coral.
Plant. Yep.
Yeah, so that zooxanthellae has got a contributing factor to the colour of the coral, but we don't know how that reacts. So one of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park scientists many years ago, Petra Woods, I think her name was, she noted that they had found a correlation between the frog in the African jungle that can change its colour, which was the negative and positive protons within the cells of the coral.
Wow.
May have a contributing factor for the ability of the coral to change its colours. So I've found over the years that I can change the colour of these corals. So we've learnt how to increase carotene, for example, in our certain foods to invigorate corals from a brown coloration to a gold coloration or a red coloration. So we increase red colorations by, you know, we increase and elevate colours in corals by elevating certain nutrients.
Levels of nutrients.
Yeah,
Wow.
so we might boron, I think, was a blue, invigorates the blue coloration, which if you start looking at things like a diamond, I'm pretty sure it's the similar minerals that you would add that would create a blue diamond. And so we're finding, so the big issue is that with the industry, because it's a consumption industry at the moment, it's an industry of people that have glass boxes and enjoy them and farm them, frag them and grow them and share them and spawn them and do all these things that are just amazing with their home aquarium. But they're so into their own little hobby that the scientists have been against us for years. We've pulled them out of the ocean. We've done the opposite of what they wanted to do. So science hasn't always been with us the whole time. And that's lacked in learning how these colours are created. It's lacked.
Fish also have various colours. I mean, you look at a parrotfish or
correct.
any of those other ones, and some of them obviously resemble some of the colours in the corals. So
Yes.
do you think there could be a correlation between some of the fish and the corals?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then some of the nutrients as well. You've got to remember that the nutrient distribution on the Great Barrier Reef is an essential part as the fish. You know, the fish eat the food and then distribute, you know, silt, sand. So absolutely, absolutely. Some fish do, in certain environments, do have a contributing factor to corals because of the nutrient level in that area. Or there's always a contributing factor or something in that mannerism. But the guy in the UK, I'd have to look up him actually and what it was again, because I looked up and it was going to cost me €140,000 per coral to start deciphering coloration, because I see colours and corals change. Because I go to a rock and I'll dive this rock and I know that corals change colours and they adapt, or there's a key denominator in the environment, in the water environment, a key nutrient. There'll be a nutrient, there's a food source, there's something in there. But sometimes I dive areas and you'll have certain species of coral that you know come in basic colour forms, plain colour forms like red and green colours, and then you'll get these double colours, red and green mixed together, and then you start seeing genetics. So when you start looking at the donut ones we looked at, the round ones, so they come in plain red, plain green. But then you start seeing the red and the green together and you're seeing what we call a bleeding apple in the industry.
Is that one up there?
Yes, that's a bleeding apple.
Yep.
There. So that's a bleeding apple scully. And then you get the red and black coloration. So then you start learning about genetics and you start seeing that genetic coloration is carried, or how, one of the things they talk about reef restoration is losing the genetic stock. So when we start looking at how these were created, well, we also have to make sure that we look at genetic stock, because originally the stock, I could imagine, would have started in red and green, and then those two corals have spawned together and created a red and green combination. So you can see with the coral coloration from the collection of the species and the range of colours that we get in those species, and then you get these abnormal colours that are like, wow, what happened there?
Where did that come from?
Yeah, it's like so left field that it's like crazy. But that's when you start learning about genetics and you start learning about evolution. That's
and
also
the nutrient contribution, obviously, because that would be fluctuating in waters as well.
absolutely, and that's the dominating factor of, you know. And the issue is that we don't know. We just don't know, Kim. And this is what we're going to change.
You mentioned a word, frag.
Yep.
People who frag. And I noticed that you were mentioning that when you were showing me through some of the tanks. What is fragging?
Fragging is fragmentating.
Right.
So it's
Makes
taking
sense.
a fragmentation of coral and then growing it. So it's you know, you got to remember that coral farming, coral fragging or coral fragmentation is similar to gardening, where you would take a cutting, you would do a grafting. You know, you can do the same. You propagation. So in the industry, it's called propagation. It's called fragging. Fragging. We, you know, everywhere we go, there's always lingo, and fragging, you know, is just the cool one for the industry that everyone calls. But yeah.
So what does it involve? Because you showed me down there before, so just step me through what you were showing me in the different sections.
Well, again, you know, we come back to the knowledge. You know, you don't learn these things without having things go wrong. So what we've learned over the years from our experimentation is we use diamond, we use wet saws, so wet diamond saws, same as what you would use to cut tiles in your house. We have some special saws, we have some customization done to them to make them last in saltwater environment. But basically we use a tile cutting saw and we just cut them with a diamond saw. It's super easy to cut coral, super easy to frag coral. But you've got to remember, you know, corals don't like any temperatures above 30 degrees. So when you're cutting, that can cause friction and heat. So there's lots of little key things that you've got to remember when cutting up coral. You've got to know how to cut the coral, where to cut the coral, what kind of corals can be cut. Because some of the corals don't actually like to be cut. Some of them don't like to be fragged. Some corals are an independent solitary coral, and if you try and cut them in half, you just kill them. And you know, we've had to learn those sorts of things the hard way. So there's certain species that we now know that, and everyone in the industry knows that you don't frag that. That's just a beautiful piece of coral you enjoy.
Just look at it.
So
Don't frag it.
So fragmentation, it's again, you know, like this Cythastria, second from the top, is a very fast-growing species, and you need just simply.
Oh, I saw a tile with one of them on it.
Yeah, and you just need like literally 5 millimeters square piece, which you can use. We have a little tiny bandsaw about this big that's got a little tiny blade, and we can cut really small pieces, but we can literally go down to like 1/2 centimeter squared, and that species will grow to the outside of that tile, which is about 2 inches, in about 3 to 4 months.
Wow.
From that microfragmentation. Same as this species here is an oxypore. It's an extremely fast-growing coral. Some of them, like the ones in the middle, the near the top, the lords.
With the nucleus sort of looking.
Yeah, those guys, they take a long time. So they're a very slow grower. So those guys can take upwards of taking one polyp, you know, to turn it into 16 polyps might take, you know, 6 months to a year. So you results, and then you're not getting something that you can refarm very quickly. So each and every single species has its different growth rates and different fragging techniques, special techniques. So some corals have got a very thin flesh component on top of their hard calcareous bone. So some of them we have to cut them a little bit, then leave them for a day, come back the next day, cut them a bit more, leave them for a day, cut them a bit more, and then we get to the final fragmentation. And then they don't die, and then we keep them alive, and they're very successful, and we can farm them. So, you know, these techniques for future prospects are very, very good. And the industry in its whole is absolutely wonderful at doing this farming. And, you know, future platforms that we're going to do is help share this with the rest of the world. Is these amazing techniques that the average home aquarist in Germany or London or Melbourne or Japan, you know, do as their afternoon routine.
It's amazing to think that we have pieces of the Great Barrier Reef in aquariums all over the world,
Yes.
especially when faced with the future. Because I've had marine biologists and scientists say that not all the corals are going to survive ocean warming, acidification, and all the other natural threats that it faces into the future. So how do you feel about the fact that you've been able to, as a custodian of all these corals, save so many species, even if they're in aquariums?
About 14 years ago, I started getting a little bit concerned about my future stock. The situation of the coral on the planet is not good. And first-hand seeing the bleaching events of the last few years and being so long underwater with coral, all those years ago I came up with an idea, and I thought, well, all these years of travelling the world, seeing how passionate people are with glass boxes with coral are elsewhere in the world where there is no coral and there is no salt water, it really gave me an opportunity to broaden my horizon from my opinion of the future is that we're not going to stop driving our cars, we're not going to stop flying in planes, we're not going to stop enjoying our lifestyle that we are at the moment. So I thought, how am I going to look after these corals? How am I going to ensure that we have them for future generations? And that's where I came up with Coral Ark. And I thought, with the Ark, I really,
Yes, Noah.
Yeah. We could go about this in a lot of ways, and we could do, we could take on conservation in its entirety, or we could really fine tune and my strong point's been coral, just coral. Like, fish are great and everything, and there's lots of other intimate organisms that are a part of the coral's life and the coral's environment. But, for me, I really wanted to just single out coral and preserve coral in the best way I could possibly do. If I can turn every single Aquarist in the world into the custodian of our reefs corals, our world's corals, if I can be responsible and really answer all the questions of my hobbyists around the world and bring science to the hobbyists and hobbyists to the science and really create a platform where everyone can just relax and just realise that we're all doing this for the same cause and the benefits are great for all. So Coral Ark for me is going to be my future global seed bank of coral. We're going to build the world's biggest seed bank of coral, and we're going to do it with everyone. I'm sick of seeing organisations that don't allow anyone else in other than the highly trained or highly qualified people. There's no access point for people to get in to look at coral, to preserve coral. I travel the world in this industry, and there's so many people with these voices, and they go, what can I do to help? And someone just needs to be there and answer those calls. So Coral Ark for me is going to be a huge platform where the Aquarius is going to get an opportunity to be a part in the mannerism of being the world's first to, we want to be the world's first to build a molecular testing pack for the home Aquarius. What they can do is on our website, they'll be able to list their corals, but we'll also be able to bring science to the hobby and really allow the hobbyists to buy a molecular testing pack and become a part of the solution.
Citizen science, yeah.
And the citizen science solution. So, and not only are we going to do that, we're going to allow a platform for them to share their data, but we're also going to do the reverse for the other guys, and that's about building the world's biggest live seed bank. And we're not going to do it without involving divers to help out where coral lives in the ocean, because it's not all about the Great Barrier Reef. There's more than just coral. And the emphasis behind coral and what I want to do with Coral Ark is creating a platform for everyone to be involved in conservation. I really feel that the future conservation and the future responsibilities of our planet need to be put back into the hands of the people.
Project Catalyst functions around the idea, under government regulation, mind you, but also as innovators. Our farmers have been trialling practices that have improved the management of sugarcane, particularly all along the Australian coast as far north as Mossman.
Yep.
That water quality improvement, I mean, over the time you've been diving, and we've seen the water quality monitoring results, what do you notice about the corals, both inshore and on the outer reef?
Well, what I noticed with the change with what's been going on, and I actually follow closely, and I really enjoy the work you do, Kim, because we don't want to go and point the finger at anyone for the sediment build-up or anything. We didn't know about this 150 years ago. Over the last years, I've seen some changes. I've seen some bad changes. The bleaching events, the nutrient build-up, but you've got to remember that a lot of the bad side of things has been a correlation to cyclones and big weather events, floods, big rain events and
totally
whatnot.
uncontrollable.
But on a whole, of my experience of the inshore reef that I've been diving for the last 20 years, it's pretty much the same, if not improved. Some areas have gone down, but when you look at a broad picture of it all, the improvements of the catchments around the area have been improving. You know, the fish stocks have been good too, because I'm a fisherman as well. I come home from the reef and I go out fishing with the boys, you know. That's just what I do. You know, I've seen an improvement of the coral stocks. I've seen an improvement of the water quality. My neap tides are coming cleaner, clearer. I'm finding that corals aren't getting buried and sealed as much anymore. You know, but there's always going to be sections that aren't doing so well. But on a whole, everything's doing pretty good. You know, but the issue I find is that there's not many of us that are getting into those environments that are sharing this. So, you know, I'm glad with my new leaf being rolled over into conservation of coral that I'm actually going to have this exciting time of going back over where I've been, and now I can go back and share and really start answering these questions about, you know, these cane farmers have been working hard, you know, they've been making changes, and there's not a whole lot of reward for effort going on, you know, and in the socio-economic side, you know, for the, you know, I'm not seeing too much of a good story coming through my media channels, and you know, that's probably the only downside I can say to that is cane farmers are doing a good job, but it's not being portrayed to the people in the right way.
Good news may not be as saleable. Well, this has been a great news story, and I'm really looking forward to finding out more about your plans for the future and the Coral Ark. Collaboration, conservation, sounds great to me. Nix, thank you so much for your time.
All right, thanks, Kim.
Well, thanks for spending your time with me, Kim Clyden, today in conversation with owner of Ultra Corals, Nick Dos Santos. If you'd like to hear more stories and conversations like this, please join us on our YouTube channel. You'll find us at Project Catalyst. Also, our website, projectcatalyst.net.au, and our social channels on Facebook and LinkedIn. Project Catalyst is funded by the partnership between the Australian Government's Reef Trust and the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, and the Coca-Cola Foundation, with support from WWF Australia.